The air was not just electric, it was charged with the kind of static tension that precedes a lightning strike. Inside the opulent conservative conference hall in Nashville, day 2 of the annual GOP Leadership Summit was underway, and the ballroom pulsed with an expectant hum. Journalists jostled for position, delegates whispered, and high-profile political figures exchanged knowing glances. The tension hadn't merely been building for days, it had been a slow-burning fuse, lit the moment Caroline Levit's name appeared alongside Mitt Romney's on the keynote schedule. Everyone in the room understood the symbolism. These two represented not just different wings, but entirely different eras of the Republican Party. What no one, not even the most seasoned political pundit, could have predicted was the sheer explosiveness of the confrontation that was about to unfold. Caroline entered from stage left, a vision in crisp white, her heels clicking a confident rhythm against the polished floor. She carried more than just her notes. She carried the palpable fire of a generation that was utterly, unequivocally tired of being told to wait their turn. As she took her seat next to the silver-haired Romney, who offered a practiced, almost imperceptible half-smile, the contrast was stark, almost theatrical. He embodied the past, measured, traditional, a relic of a bygone political age. She, with her unblinking gaze and coiled energy, looked like a political lightning rod, ready to draw down the storm. Moderator Rachel Cummings leaned into her mic, her voice a calm counterpoint to the room's rising pulse. "Senator Romney, let's begin with you. The topic is the GOP's direction going into the next election cycle." Romney, ever the picture of composed statesmanship, adjusted his tie. "The party thrives when we stick to principles," he began, his voice smooth and resonant. "Fiscal responsibility, global leadership, and unity. Not when we chase populist applause or alienate half the country with cable news soundbites." A polite, almost perfunctory round of claps followed. Caroline's eyes, however, didn't flinch. Rachel turned to her. "Ms. Levit." Caroline leaned forward, her voice calm, yet charged with an undeniable current. "With all due respect, Senator, this party isn't clinging to nostalgia anymore. It's evolving. We're done waiting for permission slips from the old guard. This movement doesn't need your blessing to move forward because we already are." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd, half shocked, half thrilled, a raw, visceral reaction that spoke volumes. Romney forced a brittle laugh. Caroline didn't blink. "No, sir. The future is done listening to lectures from the past." The moderator looked genuinely frozen, caught between the urge to intervene and the primal instinct to simply let it burn. From the back rows, phones were already aloft, recording, live streaming, tweeting. On social media, the moment went viral in minutes. Hashtags like GOP Showdown and With or Without You exploded across platforms. But Caroline wasn't done. She turned fully to Romney, her body language a declaration. "You say unity, but what you really mean is conformity. You want a Republican Party that looks like 2008, but it's 2025. We've got new fights, new voices, and a base that's wide awake." Romney sat stiff, his lips pressed into a thin white line. The moderator finally stepped in, her voice a little too bright. "Let's shift the conversation to foreign policy." But everyone knew the real headline had just happened. The foreign policy segment was supposed to cool things down. It didn't. As Rachel Cummings valiantly tried to steer the discussion toward America's role in Eastern Europe, Caroline Levit took a slow, deliberate sip of water, her eyes never leaving Mitt Romney. The senator, known for his diplomatic rhetoric, was visibly attempting to regain control of the room. "We need to reassert American leadership globally," Romney declared, his hands folded neatly. "What we don't need is reckless rhetoric that alienates our allies and empowers our adversaries." Caroline set her water down with a soft click. "Reckless?" she asked, leaning slightly toward the mic, her voice laced with a dangerous calm. "What's reckless is acting like the world hasn't changed since the Cold War. The American people are tired of endless spending, foreign interventions, and being lectured about alliances that haven't served them." There was a sharp intake of breath from the audience. Romney stiffened. "That's dangerously simplistic. Our strength lies in diplomacy, not in tearing down relationships that took decades to build." Caroline's voice turned razor sharp. "You want to talk about diplomacy? How about the kind that sends pallets of cash to hostile regimes? Or the kind that involves bureaucrats shaking hands while our borders remain wide open?" The crowd erupted. Some applauded wildly, others shifted uncomfortably, but Caroline's words hit home with devastating precision, particularly among the younger, more activist-driven segment of the audience. Romney was visibly agitated now, his composure cracking. "That kind of demagoguery undermines everything we've built." "No," Caroline interrupted, her voice rising just enough to cut through the din. "What undermines us is pretending everything is fine while the base of this party is screaming for change. They're not interested in polished speeches. They want action. They want someone who fights for them, not someone who smiles through surrender." The moderator tried again, a desperate plea in her eyes. "Let's move on." Caroline wasn't done. "You've had your chance, Senator. For decades, you've represented a version of the GOP that was more worried about appeasing the media than representing the people. And guess what? They noticed." Romney tried to respond, but the applause was too loud, too sustained. Her words, blunt, unfiltered, and unapologetically bold, had landed like a hammer on marble. Even those in suits, the old guard, shifted uneasily, sensing the undeniable shift in momentum. Somewhere backstage, a campaign advisor muttered under his breath, "She just rewrote the GOP playbook in real time." Outside the venue, clips of the moment were already flooding X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Political commentators scrambled to spin the exchange, to fit it into their pre-existing narratives. But in the room, there was no mistaking what had just happened. Caroline Levit hadn't just clashed with a senator. She had declared war on the old Republican order, and she was winning. The energy backstage felt like the aftermath of a political earthquake. As Caroline stepped off the stage, aides buzzed around her, half stunned, half thrilled. Her phone was already vibrating nonstop, texts from allies, alerts about trending hashtags, and invitations from cable news producers. But Caroline barely glanced at the screen. She knew what had just happened. She hadn't come to play nice. She had come to plant a flag. Mitt Romney, meanwhile, remained seated on stage, his jaw tight. The moderator was trying to fill time with a Q&A session, but the audience's attention had splintered. Dozens were already trickling out, murmuring over what they had just witnessed. For the establishment figures in attendance, it had been an ambush. For younger conservatives, it had been a revolution. An hour later, back at her makeshift war room in a downtown hotel suite, Caroline sat with her team, the glow of laptop screens illuminating their focused faces. She reviewed clips from the summit with a clinical detachment, a strategist dissecting a battle. One aide turned the volume up as a prominent conservative commentator played a segment of her exchange with Romney on a primetime broadcast. "This wasn't a debate," the host declared, his voice booming. "This was the sound of the GOP turning a page." Caroline didn't smile. She wasn't interested in praise. Her gaze was already fixed on the horizon, calculating the next move. "I want a statement out by morning," she told her press secretary, her voice low but firm. "Something that makes it clear this isn't about ego. It's about direction. This party has to decide if it wants to keep pretending or start leading." Her digital director chimed in, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. "Your TikTok post already has 3.1 million views. People are eating it up." Caroline looked up, a shadow of anticipation crossing her features. "But what?" she pressed. "We're going to get hit hard tomorrow. Every legacy media outlet is going to frame this as an attack on civility or some unprovoked outburst. Romney's team is already working the press." Caroline leaned forward, steepling her fingers, her eyes glinting with resolve. "Then we stay on message. We didn't attack. We told the truth. If that's a problem for them, maybe they're the ones who need to check their civility." Meanwhile, at a private donor dinner across town, Mitt Romney was venting to close supporters, his usual composure frayed. "She's reckless," he seethed, his voice tight. "She doesn't understand what it takes to govern. She's a headline, not a leader." But what of the donors? A billionaire hedge fund manager whose quiet influence often outweighed his public pronouncements merely shrugged. "Maybe," he conceded, a hint of something unsettling in his tone, "or maybe she just said what millions of people are thinking, but too afraid to admit." Romney didn't respond. He didn't have to. The movement Caroline represented wasn't asking for permission anymore, and deep down, he knew it. The morning after the summit, headlines flooded every corner of the media landscape. Some praised Caroline Levit's boldness, others condemned it, but none, absolutely none, could ignore it. Levit blows up GOP status quo in Romney clash, blared Politico. Shockwaves from conservative uprising. Levit versus Romney, declared Fox News. Civility is dead. Caroline Levit killed it, opined MSNBC. Caroline scanned the news cycle with her team over coffee, noting each headline with a clinical detachment. She didn't care if they called her dangerous, divisive, or disrespectful. In fact, she counted it as confirmation. The establishment was threatened, and that meant she was doing something profoundly right. Set the interview with Carlson, she told her media lead, then Newsmax. I'll give them the next piece of the story before Romney spins it. On Capitol Hill, Romney's communications office worked overtime, a frantic hive of activity. Carefully crafted statements were drafted, revised and re-revised. He tried to position himself as the adult in the room, measured, experienced, above the noise, but the momentum was slipping, like sand through an hourglass. The clips of Caroline's rebuke were already viral, inescapable. The TikToks and YouTube shorts weren't kind to him. In one, someone had added dramatic, almost mournful music as Caroline said, "You've had your chance, Senator." The people noticed. And people were noticing. In a high school auditorium in rural Ohio, a history teacher paused her civics lesson to show students the clip. "This," she said, her voice resonant, "is what political realignment looks like." In Texas, a bar owner had looped Caroline's remarks by TV above the counter, a constant, defiant hum. In Florida, a campaign staffer for another Senate candidate reworked their messaging. Less safe talk, more fire. Go full Caroline. But Caroline wasn't basking in the moment. Her instincts, honed for years of watching the political game, told her this was just the opening salvo. If she didn't capitalize fast, they'd try to box her in, define her before she could define herself. "We need to launch the next strike," she said in a call with her comms team, her voice unwavering. "Not just another response video, a real message, a full statement, a vision forward. I want to talk about what the GOP should be, not just what it's not." They listened intently, hanging on every word. Her words weren't rehearsed. They were mission-driven, forged in conviction. Romney represents a relic, and if we're serious about winning the future, we can't carry dead weight. Her strategist nodded, a slow, appreciative gesture. "You're not just shifting the Overton window, you're blowing it off the hinges." She smirked, a rare, fleeting expression. "Good, then people can finally see what's been hidden." By noon, the next round of tweets hit. She quoted Reagan. She posted behind-the-scenes footage. But the line that truly caught fire was simple and brutal. "If speaking uncomfortable truths makes me the villain, then maybe it's the heroes who need a spine." It was retweeted by senators, podcasters, athletes, even an A-list actor. She didn't flinch. She kept moving, because Caroline Levit wasn't just a viral moment. She was a signal flare. And the storm was just beginning. The sixth day brought the expected, yet still breathtaking, escalation. The moment she'd been waiting for arrived with the force of a political tsunami. Caroline Levit was officially invited to the National Conservative Leadership Debate. It was to be the first major televised political showdown of the year, a gladiatorial arena hosted in front of a live audience, with millions watching across the country, their eyes glued to screens, hungry for the next act in this unfolding drama. The invite list was stacked with establishment heavyweights, senators whose names were synonymous with decades of D.C. power, former governors whose careers spanned eras, and media darlings whose faces were fixtures on every cable news panel. And then there was Caroline, the name that hadn't even been whispered in these elite circles 2 years ago, now a glaring, undeniable presence. The debate stage would pit her directly across from Romney himself, a confrontation that promised to be less a debate and more a public execution of the old guard. The announcement alone triggered waves that crashed through the political ecosystem. On primetime cable, panelists scoffed, their voices dripping with condescension. She doesn't have the gravitas, one declared, shaking his head. It's going to be embarrassing for her. On social media, the sentiment was the polar opposite, a digital roar of anticipation. "Let her cook," tweeted one user, echoing thousands. "This is gonna be biblical." The night before the debate, Caroline didn't rest. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. She prepped with her team in a small, quiet room, far removed from the cacophony of headlines and hot takes. Her strategy wasn't to go for cheap shots or dramatic gasps, though the temptation was certainly there. It was to redefine the battlefield itself, to shift the very terms of engagement. "No talking points," she told her advisors, her voice calm, resolute. "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to be clear." She meticulously honed her arguments, not for sound bites, but for unassailable truth, stripped bare of political jargon. The debate opened as expected, a predictable dance of political theater. Romney, ever the polished statesman, delivered a measured answer on foreign policy, his words carefully chosen, his tone composed. The moderator nodded, the crowd clapped lightly, a familiar, polite rhythm. Then came the question that set the room on fire. A match dropped into a barrel of gunpowder. "Miss Levitt," the moderator began, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Governor Romney has stated repeatedly that the current wave of populism is a danger to democracy. How do you respond?" Caroline didn't blink. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. "Populism isn't a danger," she stated, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "It's a consequence. When people are ignored, dismissed, and lied to long enough, they don't whisper, they roar. And if that roar makes the elite uncomfortable, good." Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by murmurs, then a smattering of applause that quickly swelled. Romney cut in, visibly irritated, his composure finally cracking. "With all due respect, that's not policy, it's performance." Caroline leaned forward, her eyes sharp, predatory. "And with all due respect, Senator, performance is pretending to represent the people while taking their votes for granted." The moderator tried to pivot, a desperate attempt to regain control, but the audience wouldn't let it go. Cheers broke out, a wave of raw emotion. Online, the moment clipped instantly. Within an hour, it had 5 million views. That was the break. Caroline didn't just survive the debate, she owned it. Every question that followed was not a challenge, but a chance to articulate her worldview, concise, forceful, unapologetic. She exposed contradictions with surgical precision, rejected platitudes with a dismissive wave, and pushed a vision that resonated far beyond the room, reaching into living rooms and workplaces across the nation. The next morning, newspapers didn't bother with nuance. Headlines screamed the undeniable truth. "Levitt dominates debate, Romney reels." The night, everything shifted. Caroline speaks, America listens. And most notably, from a center-left publication that had previously dismissed her, "We may not agree with her, but ignoring her is no longer an option." Caroline wasn't trying to fit into the mold of past conservatives. She was melting it down and forging something entirely new, something raw and powerful that the old guard simply couldn't comprehend. The fallout from the debate was instant and seismic, sending tremors through every established institution. Cable networks scrambled to reframe their narratives, their carefully constructed talking points crumbling under the weight of Caroline's performance. Hosts who had previously dismissed her as a flash in the pan now debated her unexpected command of the room, their voices tinged with a grudging respect. Editors rushed to commission op-eds, desperate to make sense of the new political landscape. Old guard politicians called emergency donor briefings, their hushed conversations filled with a growing sense of dread. And on Capitol Hill, whispers turned to urgent warnings. She's not a spark, she's a wildfire. Caroline, meanwhile, didn't linger in the glow of victory. She knew how media worked. Attention was currency, but narrative was power. And she had no intention of letting the political establishment write hers for her. 2 days after the debate, she flew to Arizona, not to campaign, not for a rally, but to meet with working-class ranchers whose families had been ignored in the border discourse for years. She didn't bring a film crew, she didn't tweet, she simply listened. Her presence, a quiet, powerful act of defiance against the performative politics of Washington. But someone, a local, recorded part of the conversation. And that footage, Caroline sitting in dusty boots across from a fourth-generation cattleman, sleeves rolled up, notebook in hand, went viral again. She's not just talking to the base, one political analyst noted, his voice tinged with surprise. She's rebuilding it, brick by brick. Back in Washington, Romney faced mounting pressure. His debate performance was labeled out of touch, defensive, and rigid. He released a statement the next morning trying to clarify his remarks, but it only fueled the story, making him appear reactive, while Caroline's words were the ones shaping headlines. That same week, Caroline was invited to speak at a tech policy summit in Austin. Not usually her crowd, but that was precisely the point. She delivered a blistering 10-minute keynote that torched censorship, corporate overreach, and the safety culture stifling free expression. "Your platform silenced the working class while amplifying panic," she declared, her voice resonating with conviction. "Don't talk to us about trust. You sold that for ad revenue." The crowd didn't know whether to clap or squirm, but the live stream numbers shattered records. By Friday, a leaked internal poll from a major right-wing PAC showed her favorability among 18 to 35-year-olds doubling in 1 week. National outlets started calling her the breakout star of the new right, not because she pandered, but because she confronted. "We don't need influencers in government," she said in one interview. "We need insurgents." Romney's team released another video trying to reset, talking about decades of experience and earned leadership. Caroline didn't respond with a rebuttal. She posted a 6-second clip of her helping a waitress carry food trays at a campaign diner stop. Caption: "Experience doesn't mean you're in touch." Another million views. Another undeniable shift in perception. Caroline wasn't winning by being louder. She was winning by being real, or at least appearing more real than the over-polished relics she was now eclipsing. And that terrified them. Behind closed doors in D.C., panic brewed in quiet phone calls and private meetings. Major donors whispered to consultants, their voices laced with genuine fear. What if she actually wins? Caroline Levit had transitioned from outsider to frontrunner in less than 6 months. And it wasn't just because of her rhetoric. It was her discipline. While pundits expected her to burn out in a frenzy of headlines, she did the opposite. She tightened her message, expanded her outreach, and moved like a candidate already running the show. Romney's team scrambled. Political operatives began circulating talking points to reframe her rise as irresponsible populism. Anonymous op-eds popped up calling her reckless, dangerous, even unhinged. Caroline didn't flinch. In one campaign video shot in a factory parking lot in Ohio, she stared straight into the camera and said, "If telling the truth makes me dangerous, then you should be terrified." Boom. 3 million shares. Trending for days. She returned to New Hampshire for a town hall and found herself met by crowds double what her team had planned for. The fire marshal was called. A line of people stood in the snow, waiting, their faces etched with hope and anticipation. The energy felt electric, but heavier too, as if something bigger was stirring. Then, during Q&A, an older veteran raised his hand, his voice raspy. "You keep saying this isn't about politics as usual, but what is it about then?" Caroline took a long pause, letting the question hang in the air. The room hushed, leaning in. "It's about remembering that government doesn't come from marble buildings and power suits," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "It comes from people like you who paid the price, who built the country, and who were told to shut up when you started asking questions." Applause erupted, a thunderous roar. But the moment wasn't performative. It was personal. That clip became her campaign centerpiece. Meanwhile, Romney scheduled a series of high-profile media interviews to reclaim control of the narrative. But every time he spoke, it felt more like an echo of a different era, cautious, sanitized, too measured for a nation now wired for authenticity. Caroline wasn't perfect. She didn't try to be. She leaned into contradiction, admitted flaws, even joked about past mistakes in interviews. But that was her superpower. In an age of scripts, she felt unscripted. Behind the scenes, Democratic strategists took note as well. "We don't agree with her," one said on a leaked call, "but we'd be fools not to take her seriously." Caroline wasn't just challenging Romney anymore. She was rewriting the conservative playbook in real time. By the time the next debate was announced, the nation wasn't just watching, it was waiting.
Networks hyped it as the future versus the establishment showdown. Viewership projections broke records before a single word was spoken. Romney entered the stage with that familiar tight smile, his suit crisp, posture immaculate. Caroline walked in without pretense, white blazer, confidence radiating, eyes forward. The moment their eyes met, everything blurred. From the first question, Romney tried to set the tone, measured, composed, leaning on experience. Leadership isn't about volume, he said pointedly. It's about wisdom. Caroline smiled, then waited. And when it was her turn, she didn't raise her voice. She just cut through. Leadership is also about knowing when to get out of the way. The crowd roared. She didn't dominate every question. She didn't try to. She picked her battles, let silence hang when needed, and, crucially, didn't punch every time she could. Instead, she turned the debate into a conversation with the audience, not just her opponent. When pressed on her lack of decades-long political experience, she responded, "Exactly. I haven't had decades to get comfortable ignoring people." At one point, Romney leaned in, visibly frustrated. "You talk about shaking things up, but what exactly have you built?" Caroline didn't blink. "A movement with nothing but truth and a microphone, and from the looks of it, it's louder than anything your party's built in years." That was the moment. A pause, a subtle shift in the room. The moderator moved on, but everyone watching knew Romney had just lost the night, not through scandal or gaffe, but by being outpaced. The next day, newspapers didn't bother with nuance. Headlines called it a political passing of the torch. Analysts on both sides admitted the same thing. Caroline Levit had become the story. She didn't wait for validation. She got on a plane to Georgia, then Texas, then back to New Hampshire. Her movement wasn't a campaign anymore. It was a wave. In a late-night interview, she was asked what she thought of the term political disruptor. She laughed, then shrugged. If telling the truth disrupts Washington, maybe Washington needed breaking. And just like that, another soundbite went viral. The media asked, "Is this the future of politics?" America was already answering. This isn't just a generational shift, it's a reckoning. Caroline Levit didn't step onto that stage to play by old rules. She came to rewrite them. And tonight, the GOP felt that tremor. Some will call it bold, others will call it reckless. But one thing is clear, she's not asking permission anymore. The establishment has been put on notice. The future doesn't wait, and neither does she.